We look at skills like use Bible maps, read
Yes,
read
to
background
maps.
information.
Yes.
Yes, actually, that is a Krista Bontrager thing that you pointed that out. At first, I didn't have that, and I was like, you know what? You are so right. That's
We
really
have so
important.
many maps in our house.
It's so good.
What are some of those first steps that you help walk kids through?
Yes. And I love talking about this because, obviously I create curriculum so that others can, take this and multiply it. But even if people choose not to use the curriculum, I just want to equip people with skills to get kids to do this. So our curriculum is broken up into three main sections. And these are the sections, basically what I would do with my students the last 3 years of teaching when I did this. And so the first thing that we do is we equip them to understand the entire story of Scripture, just because so much of what our kids know right now about Scripture is from, a lot of times illustrated children's Bibles or from Sunday school or kids' ministry lessons. And a lot of times they just have these random snapshots of the Bible that are not in order. Like I remember distinctly just this memory from when I was in fourth grade in Sunday school, and we were learning the story of Balaam and Balak. So when King Balak hired Balaam, the sorcerer, to curse the Israelites, and then, there's Balaam and his donkey. And I just remember thinking, like, what in the world kind of book is the Bible? Like some weeks we're learning normal stories like David's anointed king. Other weeks we're learning like weird stories like a donkey is talking or a sea is being parted. And then other weeks we're learning like rules like the 10 Commandments or like good things that we should have in our life, like the fruits of the Spirit. I was so confused. And so that's one thing that I wanted my students just to understand the story from Genesis all the way to Revelation. So what we do in the first 10 lessons of the curriculum is we actually, verbally go through that whole story, and we have illustrations for each major time period. And what we have the kids do every week is they actually have to take time period cards and put them in order and then time themselves, so that they're getting to know this story forward and backwards. And then with each of the first 10 lessons, we dive into one or two of those major time periods. We have kids read larger portions of Scripture, and we have them look for some main themes throughout the Bible. So there are many themes that they could look for, but we have them look specifically for the themes of God's faithfulness, human rebellion, and God's rescue plan. And we take them, through many significant passages in Scripture where God is like dropping hints for his plan to rescue humanity. So that's the first thing that we do is, just teach kids the entire narrative of Scripture. So anytime they hear they're reading a passage of Scripture or they hear a sermon or they hear a Bible lesson, mentally they can say, okay, when does this take place? Is this taking place during the time of the United Kingdom? Is this taking place during the time of the exile? Is this taking place during the time of the early church or the patriarchs? So they can have that mental map. Then the second thing that we do is we teach them basic skills in biblical interpretation, such as reading Bible verses in context, not just pulling out an isolated verse and saying, okay, what do I think this means? But saying, okay, what does this mean in the larger passage? What is the meaning that God has given to it? Looking at things like the difference between a descriptive passage, which is, describing people or places or events, versus a prescriptive passage, that's giving commands, and then saying, okay, is this a command for us or is this a command, specifically for the people at the time? And then we look at different things like we talk about how, there's not multiple meanings of a passage, like the text, there's an objective meaning, and we might not always understand that right away, but we have to search for that. We have to seek that out. We look at skills like use Bible maps, read
Yes,
read
to
background
maps.
information.
Yes.
Yes, actually, that is a Krista Bontrager thing that you pointed that out. At first, I didn't have that, and I was like, you know what? You are so right. That's really
We have
important.
so many maps in our house.
It's so good.
Yes.
So these basic skills, that then they're putting into place as they're reading the entire narrative. And then the last third of the curriculum, what we do is we teach them how to read different Bible genres. How is reading prophecy different than reading poetry? How is reading a gospel, biography different than reading a letter? Just so that they think through like, what genre is this mainly? What other genres are mixed in with it? And then how do I read this? So, this is not exhaustive. There are other skills, that we could teach, and that hopefully, the kids that go through this will continue to learn as they grow, but just giving them the basics of understanding the entire narrative, some basic sound biblical interpretation skills, and then how do we read different genres?
That's awesome. And the first part that you talk, because we're already getting comments on here from adults. Alyssa says, I think I need the explanations of the Old Testament for myself. Like, yeah, because when there's such value to parents learning alongside their kids in these things, because there's gaps in our knowledge sometimes. Right. And I've definitely seen that in the classes that I've been teaching over the last 2 years through the ministry. I did one class called God's Big Story, where we did essentially what you're doing in the first part of your curriculum, helping people put things in order and understanding how every story in the Bible pushes the story of the Bible forward. But because of how so many of our sermons are preached and how we teach Sunday school to kids, at both ends of the age spectrum, we are conditioned to just kind of this isolated verse or isolated story strategy for interpreting the Bible. And this is why, this is a theory, not speaking for Elizabeth, but this is my theory as to why so many people become vulnerable to ideas like progressive theology or other errant ideas, because when they hear something, they don't think, oh, what does this mean in context? Because nobody's ever trained them to think that way. And then they just have all of these little kind of fortune cookie type ideas floating around in their mind, not knowing how it all fits together.